If you have red hair, there is a broken switch burning inside your body right now. Older than the Vikings, older than the Celts, older than every legend told about it. It changes the color of your hair and, as it happens, decides how much painkiller they'll give you at the dentist so you don't scream. Redheads make up 1 or 2 people out of every 100 on the planet, about the same as people with green eyes. And almost everyone thinks this fiery color was brought to Ireland by the Vikings. That's not true. Romans described redheads 700 years before the first longship ever appeared. The same color also flared up independently in a completely different kind of human, the Neanderthals, 50,000 years ago. And now for the strangest part. Almost half of Ireland carries this gene and doesn't know it. It hides, passes blindly through generations, and flares up where no one expects it. So if not the Vikings, then where did redheads get this fire from? Why did redheads, out of everyone on Earth, end up being the rarest, just 1 or 2%? And why are almost all of them concentrated on one wet island at the edge of the Atlantic? Why did nature invent red hair twice, in us and in an extinct species, as if this color was needed for the cold north for some reason? And why does the very same gene that gives redheads their fire quietly take revenge on them, burning their skin from the inside even without sunlight, and rewiring the way they feel pain? To answer that, we have to travel from a dentist chair to a Neanderthal cave, and break redheads down to the one gene that made them both rare and vulnerable at the same time. Let's start with the fact that red hair is, in essence, a malfunction. A useful, ancient one, but still a malfunction. At the base of every hair, melanocyte cells are working, and they have a choice between 2 pigments. One is eumelanin, the dark pigment that gives black and brown hair and also protects the skin from the sun. The other is pheomelanin, which is red-yellow. In most people, the dark pigment wins. In redheads, it's the opposite. One gene decides which pigment turns on, MC1R, a receptor on the surface of the melanocyte. Think of it as a switch. While it works, the cell makes dark pigment. But if MC1R has certain mutations, the signal breaks down, the switch gets stuck, and the cell pours out red pigment instead. In a large British cohort from the UK Biobank project, scientists identified 3 MC1R variants that most strongly and almost reliably produce red hair: R151C, R160W, and D294H. But here's the trick that turns red hair into a ghost. For hair to turn red, the broken copy of the gene has to come from both parents at once. And even that isn't enough. It turned out that having 2 broken copies is still not a guaranteed path to red hair. Most people with those copies end up with blonde or light brown hair. MC1R is the main switch, but other helper genes decide whether it gets fully flipped. If they don't give the signal, the fire never starts. That's why red hair is passed down so unpredictably through generations. And the same gene leaks through even in people who don't look redheaded. One broken copy is often obvious: pale skin that burns instead of tanning, a scattering of freckles, and in men, a red beard with dark blonde hair on the head. That fire sits hidden in almost half the island and shows itself slowly on faces, as a freckle here, a copper beard there. And this broken switch also drags along something you would never expect from a hair color. MC1R doesn't just affect pigment. It is tied to how the nervous system processes pain. In redheads, it seems to be rewired to a different frequency. On average, they need noticeably more painkiller at the dentist. They feel heat and cold more sharply. But at the same time, they can tolerate some other kinds of pain better. Hair color that changes the dose of anesthesia is not just a cosmetic trait, it's biology. So where did this broken switch come from? Almost everyone is sure the Vikings brought it. Almost everyone is wrong. The story sounds beautiful. Vikings, red-bearded northerners, arrive on the Irish coast in 795. The most famous of them is even called Eric the Red, and his son Leif was the first European to reach America. Red genes, red raids. There's your red Ireland. Convenient. One problem. The dates don't match, and there is a witness that destroys this version. The Roman historian Cornelius Tacitus, in the 1st century AD, almost 700 years before the first Viking raid, described the Caledonian tribes in northern Britain as tall people with fiery red hair. The ancient world already knew these lands as red-haired long before anyone had even heard of Scandinavian longships. And genetics says the same thing. Ancient DNA shows that MC1R variants that make hair red are much older than the Viking Age. They were already moving through Europe among hunter-gatherers and the first farmers thousands of years before the first longship. The Vikings found red hair already deeply rooted. They didn't bring it. They arrived at the end of its story. And geography exposes the myth completely. If the Normans had spread red hair, its peak would be where they settled most densely. Instead, the peak is in the Celtic fringe, and, for example, in Scotland, the reddest places are not the Northern Highlands or the Far Islands where the Scandinavians moved in, but the southern lowlands and the borders. The world capital of redheads is Edinburgh, in the south. The Vikings added their drop, no question. But the beginning of this story goes so deep that it reaches another human species. In 2007, a team led by Carlos Lalueza Fox did what, just a generation earlier, would have seemed impossible. They pulled the MC1R gene out of Neanderthal bones, from one individual 43,000 years old from El Cedrón Cave in Spain, and another, about 50,000 years old, from Monte Lacini in Italy. That gene carried a mutation called R307G. When researchers recreated it in human cells, the MC1R switch weakened in exactly the same way it does in modern redheads. The conclusion was obvious. There were red-haired Neanderthals with light skin, tens of thousands of years before the first modern humans ever came to Europe. And this is where honesty matters, or the story turns into a pretty lie, the kind simpler retellings love to make. The Neanderthal R307G variant is not found in modern humans. It's a different malfunction in the same switch. You did not inherit your red hair from Neanderthals. Two different species living in the same cold, dim Europe independently broke the same switch for the same reason. Nature arrived at red hair twice as a solution. And that's the first mirror. Dark Irish people got their color as an ancient inheritance, carried through thousands of years with almost no change. Redheads, on the other hand, have a color that is not an inheritance but a malfunction, one nature invented again from scratch, even in another species. One half of the island is ancient, the other is reinvented. But a solution to what? Why did cold Europe keep reaching for light skin and red hair again and again? And why, of all its corners, did this wet island at the edge of the Atlantic preserve the trait best? The answer starts with the same turn that held the whole story about dark Irish people together. About 4,000 years ago, the island was hit by a great Bronze Age wave. Migrants from the steppes of Eastern Europe, the same migration that brought the R1b haplogroup, livestock, metal, and Proto-Celtic speech. The steppe people themselves were mostly dark-eyed and dark-haired. They did not bring red hair with them. By that time, the genes for light skin and red pigment had already been moving through Europe among local hunter-gatherers and early farmers. The Bronze Age wave did something else. It mixed the population and created a new genetic cocktail. In ancient genomes from burials on Rathlin Island, Trinity College Dublin geneticists found that Bronze Age men carried that same R1b, along with blue eye variants and lactose tolerance. And it was in this new cocktail, sealed inside a gloomy island, that ancient red hair mutations found the perfect environment. Then, simple solar arithmetic takes over. Dark skin blocks ultraviolet light, but the body needs ultraviolet light to make vitamin D. In the north, where sunlight is scarce, light skin and red hair let more ultraviolet through and protect against vitamin D deficiency. What would be a dangerous malfunction in Africa becomes an advantage on a foggy island. Then isolation steps in and turns advantage into a record. Remember how the western edge of Ireland preserved its oldest blood? Wherever Cromwell exiled the defiant with the words, To hell or to Connacht, genetics narrowed and old traits froze like amber. The same thing happened with red hair. On an Atlantic isolated edge, a recessive trait that requires two copies at once didn't get diluted. It built up. That is how Ireland ended up with about 10% redheads, Scotland with about 13%, and nearly half of Ireland carrying the gene. The rarest hair color on the planet gathered in one pocket the size of an island. And here is the second mirror. The same Atlantic edge played the same trick on two halves of the island. For the dark-haired, it preserved the oldest blood. For redheads, it expanded the rarest trait into a world record. The same isolation, two different gifts. But this fire did not come free. The price is written in the very same gene. The broken MC1R switch that gives copper hair and once helped ancestors survive vitamin D deficiency also weakens the skin's protection from the sun. But recent science has uncovered something even more troubling than a weak shield. Red pigment is not just poor protection, it is a traitor. In a study published in Nature, a mouse model of the red-haired phenotype showed that the very synthesis of pheomelanin triggers melanoma, even without any ultraviolet light at all. It was enough to turn off the MC1R gene on top of a common cancer mutation, and tumors appeared in sun-protected mice. The skin of red-haired mice carried significantly more oxidative DNA damage than the skin of albino mice. Once pheomelanin was removed, protection against melanoma rose sharply. In other words, the very fire that once warmed ancestors under weak northern sunlight smolders at the cellular level like a tiny reactor. Red pigment itself drives reactive oxygen species that burn DNA from the inside. Under strong sunlight, that is added to the usual ultraviolet hit, and the risk of melanoma in redheads ends up the highest of all. That's not a reason to panic, but it is a reason for sunscreen, a hat, and regular checkups. The price was not only paid in skin. Let's return to the dentist's chair from the beginning. Redheads are also rewired in terms of pain. They need more local anesthetic and more gas to go under during surgery. They feel cold more sharply. And at the same time, according to the same data, some medications work more strongly on them, and they can endure certain kinds of pain more easily. Evolution almost never gives a clean win. For rarity and fire, you pay with skin and nerves. The price was paid in another way too. Not by the body, but by fate. In medieval Europe, redheads were linked to witchcraft and vampirism, and were directly marked as suspicious, partly because church frescoes often painted Judas and sinful women as red-haired, and the color from the canvas stuck to real people. A late 15th century inquisitorial text was used as justification for persecution. In 16th and 17th century England, red hair branded Irish and Scottish people as rebellious and dangerous. Even today, this kind of bullying has its own name: gingerism. The same trait that made ancestors noticeable and rare also made them targets for centuries. And here the story turns one last time. We promised a journey from a dentist's chair to a Neanderthal cave, and we made it. The chair explained why redheads need more anesthesia. The cave at El Cedrón showed that nature invented this fire twice. What remains is to bring the two halves of the island together. Dark Irish people carry not just old blood, but the oldest blood on the island. Redheads carry not just a rare color, but the rarest one on Earth. An ancient broken switch that cold Europe kept reinventing, that the Bronze Age wave mixed into the island's cocktail, and that the Atlantic edge preserved like amber preserves a drop of resin. A trait that almost half of Irish people carry invisibly, without knowing it, until one day two carriers have a child with hair the color of fire. Dark Irish people are the oldest. Red-haired Irish people are the rarest. Together, they are the island. Not one people and not one color, but layers of human history still readable on the faces of the western coast. So, if you have red hair, or someone in your family does, you carry a broken switch older than the Vikings, older than the Celts, one that survived persecution and was preserved by isolation at the edge of the world. And now you know where it really came from. And the island story does not end there. There was a third Irishman, too, and his name is written right into a surname that millions carry without realizing it means dark stranger. But that is the next story. If you have red hair, or if you know you carry this gene, write your county and surname in the comments. Each one is a thread leading back to the rarest hair color on Earth. And if you want to know who the dark stranger was, stay close.